I need the money, and I need it now, my son demanded, handing me his wife's bill for $280,000 as if it were a simple invoice. Don't let me down, Mum, Robert added, his voice cold. I managed a small smile. When they came back that evening to pick up the money, they found the house empty, with only an envelope left on the table. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories travel. The sound of the doorbell at 6 in the morning never brings good news. I was already awake, watching the sunrise from the kitchen window, holding my mug of tea with both hands to absorb the warmth. The winter in New England was always brutal, but at 65 years old, my bones seemed to feel the cold more acutely. When I opened the door, my heart pounded. Robert was standing there, his tense face illuminated by the faint dawn light, my only son, who rarely visited unless he needed something. There was no hug, just a hasty air kiss near my cheek as he swept past me, coming in without waiting for an invitation. Mum, I need to talk. His voice had that familiar firmness, the same one his father used when he wanted something. Robert went straight to the kitchen, where my tea was still steaming. Without ceremony, he sat at the table and placed a brown leather folder in front of him. Coffee, please. Black. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I prepared the drink in silence, watching him out of the corner of my eye. At 40 years old, Robert carried the impatient posture of someone perpetually late for something more important. His fingers drummed on the folder as he constantly checked his cell phone. How are Laura and the kids doing? I asked, placing the coffee in front of him. They're fine. Look, Mum, I don't have much time. He opened the folder and pulled out some papers. We have a serious problem. Laura made some investments that didn't pan out. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like this. For the last 5 years, since the death of my husband Richard, Robert had been managing my finances. What started as a way to help a disoriented widow gradually turned into a constant transfer of resources, always with the promise of repayment that never materialized. He slid a bank statement toward me. The number highlighted in red made my stomach drop. $280,000. It's a debt with serious people, Mum. Robert took a sip of his coffee. Laura got involved with some folks who don't joke around. I need this money by tomorrow. My hands started to tremble. Robert, that's almost everything I have. It's my retirement, the sale of the Florida condo, everything that was left after your father. And what do you need that money for? He interrupted me sharply. You live in this house, which is already paid for. Your expenses are minimal. I have my medication, my treatments. We're family, Mum. His voice hardened. You always said you'd do anything for me. There it was, the magic phrase. Family. The final argument that always made me give in, surrender, sacrifice. How many times had I heard that already? 20,000 for the business that failed. 50,000 to settle an issue with suppliers. Always the same promise. It's just a loan. I'll pay it back as soon as things get better. I looked at the statement in my hands and then at the son I barely recognized. Where was the bright-eyed boy who ran through the yard with a toy airplane in his hands? When did he transform into this harsh-looking man who treated me like a personal bank? I need time to think, I mumbled. There is no time, Mum. Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the mugs shake. I need this money today. Tomorrow will be too late. He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard covered in a thin layer of snow. When he turned around, his voice was softer, calculated. You know I'd never ask you if it wasn't important. It's for Laura's safety, for the kids. Our problems will become your problems too if this isn't resolved. A veiled threat. My own son. All right, I finally replied, my voice almost inaudible. I'll make the transfer. The relief on Robert's face was almost palpable. He smiled for the first time since he arrived. I knew I could count on you. He checked his watch. I have a meeting now, but I'll be back tonight for dinner, and we'll settle it, okay? I nodded, unable to speak. Robert put the papers away, finished his coffee in one gulp, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. Don't let me down, Mum, he said firmly, as if I were a disobedient child. The door closed. I remained motionless in the chair, the bank statement in front of me. Through the window, I watched Robert's luxury SUV drive away, leaving tire tracks in the immaculate snow. Something inside me had shifted. A lifetime of submission, first to Richard, then to Robert, weighed on my shoulders. And suddenly, like a dam breaking after years of pressure, something snapped. With my hands still trembling, I grabbed the phone and called the only person who always told me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. Sharon? It's Mary. I need your help. Sharon arrived in under an hour. We had known each other since college. She went on to have a career as a lawyer while I dropped out to marry Richard. She never approved of my choices, but she was always close by, like a constant beacon I insisted on ignoring. $280,000? Sharon nearly spilled the tea I served her. Mary, that's insane. That's practically everything you own. I nodded, feeling the weight of reality. It's not the first time, Sharon. Last year it was $75,000 for a business expansion. Before that, $40,000 to fix a supplier issue. I paused. I never saw that money again. Sharon put the mug down on the table harder than necessary. And why do you keep giving him money, Mary? You've always been so smart about so many things. How can't you see what's happening? The question hit me like a slap. Why did I keep doing this? For love? For fear? Out of habit? He's my son, I replied automatically. And you're his mother, not his bank, Sharon retorted. Richard manipulated you for 40 years, and now Robert is following in his father's footsteps. When is this going to stop? I looked out the window at the small winter garden I lovingly tended. The roses were dormant, patiently waiting for spring to bloom again. Like me, they persisted, year after year, regardless of the conditions. Today, I answered, surprising myself. This ends today. Sharon stared at me, confused. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling something inside me break, and then come back together, different, stronger. I want you to help me transfer all my money to an account Robert doesn't know about, and I want you to help me get out of this house before he gets back. Sharon's eyes widened. Then slowly a smile formed on her face. Mary Smith, I've waited almost 45 years to hear you say something like that. She pulled her cell phone from her purse. I have a studio apartment in Austin that's empty. The keys are at my office. How long do we have until Robert gets back? He said he'd be back for dinner, so about 8 hours. Sharon checked her watch. Plenty of time. We'll go to the bank first. Then we'll stop by the lawyer's office so you can give me power of attorney in case you need legal representation. And then we'll pack your bags and get out of here. I stood up, feeling a mix of terror and euphoria. In all my adult life, I had never made such a radical decision. He's going to be furious, I muttered more to myself than to Sharon. She held my hands. Mary, are you afraid of him? I thought about my son's face when he didn't get what he wanted, how his voice would change, how his eyes would harden. Yes, I admitted. I'm afraid of him in the same way I was afraid of his father. Then it's time to stop being afraid. Sharon squeezed my hands. Let's go get your things. In my bedroom, I grabbed the suitcase I'd only used twice in the last decade. I opened the closet and started choosing clothes, but soon realized I didn't want to take much from that life. Only the essentials, some clothes, my medication, important documents, and the few pieces of jewelry with sentimental value that hadn't been sold to fund Robert's businesses. At the back of the dresser drawer, I found the small wooden box where I kept the only money Richard and Robert never knew I had, close to $15,000 that I saved from selling homemade cookies and crafts over the years. My secret, my small rebellion. I picked up the frame with the photo of my mother and hesitated when I saw the photo of Robert as a child. After a moment, I decided to leave it. When I returned to the living room, Sharon was on the phone, organizing everything. The flight to Austin is confirmed for 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We still have time to go to the bank and the office. At the bank, the manager seemed surprised by my request to transfer all the money. Ms. Smith, are you sure? That's a considerable amount. Absolutely, I replied, signing the documents. And I need this transaction not to appear on any statement sent to my residential address. While we waited for the transfer to process, Sharon looked at me curiously. What are you leaving, Robert? I thought for a moment. A note, and a lesson he should have learned a long time ago. When we got back home, I carefully wrote a note on paper and left it on the kitchen table. It simply said, "The one who's disappointed is me. Don't look for me." As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I looked back at the house that had been my prison for so many years. In the garden, the dormant roses patiently awaited the moment to bloom again, exactly like me. In the cab on the way to the airport, Sharon grabbed my hand. "Are you okay?" I looked out the window, watching the city quickly pass by, taking with it decades of submission. "No," I replied honestly, "but I will be." Sharon's apartment in Austin was small but cozy, with a view of a tree-lined park. That first night, sitting on the balcony, listening to the distant sound of the city, I turned on my cell phone and immediately turned it off when I saw there were 27 missed calls from Robert. I wasn't ready to face him. "He'll find you eventually," Sharon said as she poured me a glass of wine. "We need a long-term plan." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I never thought I'd have the courage to do this. "I always knew you did," Sharon smiled. "You just needed a little push." In the following days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Robert, his wife Laura, even my sister Jane, who had probably been recruited to try and track me down. In one of the voicemails, Robert alternated between desperate pleas and veiled threats. "Mum, please call me. I'm worried about you." And then, "You can't just disappear like this. The house is in my name, remember? Think carefully about what you're doing." It was true. The house was in his name, a decision Richard had made years ago to facilitate the inheritance. Another form of control that I accepted without question. A week after my escape, I started rebuilding my life. I opened an account at a new bank. I rented a small apartment near the park and started looking for something to occupy my time. At 65 years old, I had never formally worked, but I discovered that my homemade cookies and crafts had a market at the local farmers' markets. Sharon remained in New England, but became my eyes and ears. She was the one who told me about Robert's furious visit to her office. "He was out of control," she told me over the phone. "He demanded to know where you were, threatened to sue you, said you didn't have the mental capacity to make financial decisions." "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him you were perfectly sane, and that if he continued with the threats, I would file a restraining order." Sharon laughed. He turned bright red with embarrassment. I don't think anyone had ever stood up to him before. At the end of the first month, I received a formal letter from Robert's lawyer. They demanded my immediate return, alleging concern for my mental health and threatening to file a lawsuit to have me declared incompetent. In the same envelope was a handwritten note from Laura, surprisingly humble. "Mary, please come back. Robert is out of control. The creditors are pressuring us. We need you." I handed the documents over to Sharon, who was in charge of responding formally, attaching recent medical reports proving my sanity and a detailed statement of the loans Robert had extorted from me over the years. "They don't have a case," Sharon assured me, "but Robert doesn't give up easily. He lost his personal bank, and that infuriated him." In the second month, I received an unexpected visit. Laura appeared at my new apartment, pale and noticeably thinner. "How did you find me?" I asked, surprised to see her at my door. "We hired a private investigator," she admitted, looking embarrassed. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, but ended up letting her pass. Laura looked around my small apartment curiously. "It's cozy," she commented, clearly surprised to see me living in such a modest space after the spacious house I had left behind. "It's mine," I replied simply. We sat on the small balcony, the park visible in the distance. Laura held her mug with trembling hands. "Things are bad, Mary," she finally said. "Robert is different, aggressive, losing control." "How are my grandchildren?" I asked, feeling a pang of guilt. "Scared. They don't understand what's happening. Robert sold his truck. We're trying to sell the lake house. Everything to pay off the debts." She paused. "It wasn't just the $280,000, Mary. There's much more." It didn't surprise me. Richard always had another hidden debt too. "So you didn't come here to convince me to go back," I stated. "You came to ask for more money." Laura looked down. "It's more complicated than that. The men we owe aren't patient. Robert told them you have the money." A shiver ran down my spine. "He used me as collateral?" Laura didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. "You need to get out of that house, Laura," I said, holding her hands. "Take the kids and go to your parents' house." "It's not that simple," she murmured. "Robert controls everything. Our accounts, our documents." Her voice broke. "I don't know how to leave." In the same way I didn't know, were her next words, spoken so softly I almost didn't hear them. Her words moved me deeply. It was true. For decades I didn't know how to leave, how to break the cycle, until I finally found the courage. "I can help you," I offered. "Not with money, but to get out." Laura looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "He'll find us, just like he found you. Then we'll be ready when he arrives," I replied with a confidence I had never felt before. "But first, we need to get you and the kids out of that house." After Laura left, with a plan laid out and my new phone number carefully hidden in the sole of her shoe, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The orange horizon seemed to symbolize my own transformation, from darkness to light. My phone rang. It was Sharon. "Laura found you, didn't she?" she asked bluntly. "How did you know?" Robert showed up at my office again, this time with one of the creditors, a terrifying guy with scars on his face. They made veiled threats, wanting to know where you were. My stomach churned. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that if they touched a hair on your head, or mine, or anyone connected to this case, I would make sure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars." Sharon paused. "Mary, this is getting dangerous. Robert is desperate." "I know," I replied, watching the last ray of sun disappear over the horizon. "And desperate people do desperate things." The next morning, I was awakened by insistent knocking on the door. For a terrifying moment, I thought Robert had found me, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. "Ma'am, Mary Smith?" she asked when I partially opened the door, keeping the security chain on. "Yes, that's me. I'm Detective Olivia, Police Department. We need to talk about your son, Robert Smith." My heart raced. Did something happen to him? The detective's expression remained neutral. "May I come in?" I let her in and offered her coffee, which she accepted. While I was preparing the mugs in the small kitchen, I tried to calm my trembling hands. "Ms. Smith," the detective began, sitting on the sofa, "your son is being investigated for financial fraud, document forgery, and possible involvement in loan sharking. We would like to know if you had any knowledge of these activities." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. A part of me always knew Robert wasn't honest in his business dealings, just as his father hadn't been. But hearing the words, police investigation, made it terrifyingly real. "No," I replied honestly. I knew he had financial problems, but not the extent or nature of them. The detective wrote something in her notebook. "You left home suddenly 2 months ago, right? Can you tell us why?" I told her everything. The successive loans, the broken promises, the emotional pressure, the pressure for the $280,000. The detective listened without interrupting, only taking occasional notes. "Did he use your name on any document? Did he ask you to sign papers without explaining what they were for?" I thought for a moment. "Some years ago, he asked me to sign some documents to facilitate financial transfers in case I needed help. He said it was for my protection in old age." The detective nodded. "We found several suspicious transactions in accounts opened in your name, Ms. Smith. Accounts you probably didn't even know existed." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. Robert hadn't just manipulated me. He had stolen my identity. "What happens now?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "We will continue the investigation. Your formal statement will be needed soon." She hesitated. "I must warn you that your son will likely be charged in the coming weeks, and considering the people he got involved with, it would be sensible to reinforce your security." After the detective left, I called Sharon, who promised to fly to Austin on the next flight. "I always knew Robert was involved in shady things," she said, "but I never imagined it would come to this point." That afternoon, I received a message from Laura. "He found out about our plan. I'm locked in the room with the kids. He's destroying everything." My blood ran cold. I immediately called Detective Olivia, who promised to send a patrol car to Robert's address. The following hours were a blur of calls, messages, and fragmented updates. By nightfall, all I knew was that Laura and my grandchildren were safe in a shelter, and that Robert had been taken into custody for questioning after resisting police intervention. Sharon arrived around 9 o'clock in the evening and found me on the balcony, looking at the city lights. She sat beside me in silence for a few minutes. "How are you feeling?" she finally asked. "Guilty," I admitted. "If I hadn't left, maybe this wouldn't have happened." Sharon shook her head firmly. "No, Mary. If you hadn't left, you'd be sinking with him, probably being used for more fraudulent schemes." She grabbed my hand. "You did the only thing you could do. You saved yourself. And in doing so, you probably saved Laura and your grandchildren too." The next morning, the headline in the local newspaper took my breath away. "Businessman arrested for fraud and involvement in loan sharking." The photo of Robert being led away in handcuffs by the police seemed to belong to another reality, not mine. My phone rang. It was Detective Olivia. "Ms. Bitcher, Smith, your son is requesting your presence at the police station. He insists on speaking only with you." I looked at Sharon. who had already read the news and was watching me with concern. "You don't have to go," she said. "After everything he did?" "Yes, I have to go," I interrupted, surprising myself. "I need to look him in the eye and end this once and for all." The police station was a cold, impersonal place, with fluorescent lights that highlighted every wrinkle on my tired face. Robert was brought into a visiting room, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller, older. When he saw me, his eyes, so much like his father's, filled with tears. "Mom," he said, his voice choked. "You came." I sat across from him, maintaining my distance. "You wanted to see me. I'm here." Robert looked like a cornered animal, glancing around as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand the situation I'm in," he began, leaning forward. "These people don't joke around. If I don't pay what I owe—" "No," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly firm. "You don't understand the situation you got yourself into. I'm not here to give you money, Robert. That time is over." His face changed, vulnerability giving way to rage. "You abandoned me when I needed you most, your own family. Is that what you're going to tell your grandchildren? That you left their father to rot in jail?" I took a deep breath, refusing to be manipulated again. "I will tell them that their father made bad decisions, just like their grandfather, and that I finally made a good decision." Robert slammed his handcuffed hands on the table. "The house is in my name. Still don't get it. You can keep the house. You no longer have anything that interests me." "And what about me? I'm your son." "A son who used me like a bank, who forged documents with my name, who threatened and intimidated me. A son who offered his own mother as collateral to loan sharks." I stood up, my voice calmer than I ever could have imagined. "I have myself, something I almost completely lost because of men like you and your father." I walked toward the door, stopped, and turned back. "Laura and the children are safe. They will have a chance to start over, away from you." I paused. "And I will too." As I left the police station, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. The Austin sun shone brightly, almost blindingly after the artificial light of the station. Sharon was waiting for me in the car. "How did it go?" she asked, concerned. I took one last look at the grey building where I had left my son and decades of submission. "Liberating," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, I broke into a genuine smile. 6 months passed since my escape and Robert's arrest. Winter had arrived in Austin, bringing frequent rains and colder nights. My small apartment now felt like a real home, with my plants on the balcony and my colourful craft pieces adorning the walls. Laura and my grandchildren, Peter, who was 7, and Julia, who was 5, had moved to San Diego, near her family. We talked weekly via video calls, a technology I learned to master with Sharon's help. The children were adjusting well to the new life, although they still asked about their father occasionally. "Grandma, when can we visit you?" Peter asked during our last conversation. "In the summer vacation, sweetie. I promise we'll go to the park and get ice cream together." Laura's image appeared on the screen, smiling shyly. She looked healthier now, with fuller cheeks and a calmer gaze. "Are you really inviting us, Mary?" "Of course. My apartment is small, but we'll fit. It will be good to hear the kids' laughter around here." After ending the call, I sat on the balcony watching the rain fall over the city. Robert's trial was scheduled for the following month. The accusations were serious: fraud, forgery, use of false documents, association with a criminal organization. Sharon estimated a sentence of at least 8 years. I had agreed to testify, not for revenge, but for justice, for myself, for Laura, for my grandchildren, and for everyone else Robert had deceived over the years. The phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mary Smith, this is Paul Miller, your son's lawyer. I felt a knot in my chest. In recent months, Robert had changed lawyers several times, each one promising legal miracles that never materialized. What can I do for you? Robert wants to propose a deal. He has information about larger operations that may interest the prosecutor in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he needs your help. I took a deep breath, already guessing where this was going. What kind of help? Financial, of course. To cover the fees for a specialized legal team, $180,000. I almost laughed. The audacity was incredible. Mr. Miller, I no longer have that amount, and even if I did, I wouldn't use it that way. Ms. Smith, his tone hardened. Your son is facing more than 8 years in prison. As a mother, he interrupted. You should. As a mother, I interrupted back. I did what I could for decades. Now Robert needs to face the consequences of his own actions. There was a prolonged silence on the other end of the line. He said you would respond like that. He asked me to tell you that he still has copies of the documents you signed, documents that could incriminate you in some of his schemes. My stomach churned, but I kept my voice firm. Tell my son that blackmail is one more crime to add to his list, and I'm willing to face any accusation if it means finally breaking this cycle. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. I immediately called Sharon and told her about the conversation. He's lying, she assured me. Any document you may have signed, we already clarified to the police that there was manipulation. Besides, the investigation has already established a pattern of behavior on his part. Even so, that night was difficult. I stayed awake, mentally reviewing every paper I had signed over the years at Robert's or Richard's request. How many contracts, how many powers of attorney, how many documents I barely read, trusting that my husband or my son had my best interests in mind. The next morning, I was awakened by a knock on the door. It was Detective Olivia again, accompanied by another officer. Ms. Smith, we need you to come with us to the police station. There's been a development in your son's case. On the way, the detective explained. Robert tried to bribe a guard to smuggle a cell phone into his cell. The guard, who was part of an internal operation, recorded everything. At the police station, they showed me the transcript of a call Robert intended to make as soon as he had the phone. It was to one of the men he owed money to, offering my address in Austin as collateral that he would pay his debts. My mother has money hidden. If I can't pay, you know where to find her. I read the words, feeling a coldness that seemed to come from inside my bones. My own son was willing to put my life at risk to save his own skin. Ms. Smith, the detective spoke softly. Considering this new evidence, we are offering you temporary police protection and strongly suggest you consider moving again. I returned home, escorted by an officer. Sharon was already there, having been informed by the detective. She hugged me as soon as I walked in. I'm already looking for a new place for you, a gated community with security in Phoenix. I looked around my small apartment, at the plants I cared for so much, the colourful curtains I had sewn, the view of the park that brought me peace every morning. No, I said, surprising myself. I'm not going to run away again. I'm not going to let Robert keep controlling my life, even from behind bars. Sharon looked at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. Mary, those men are dangerous. I know, and I'll take every necessary precaution, but this is my home now, the first one I truly chose for myself. I'm not giving it up. In the following days, we installed a complete security system with cameras, alarms, and reinforced locks. The police increased patrols in the neighborhood, and 2 undercover officers took turns in a car parked outside the building. Laura called me in a panic after being informed of the situation. "Mary, come here. Stay with us. Please. I'm safe, honey," I reassured her. "And I have a life here now. My craft markets, my friends, my watercolor classes for seniors." I laughed a little. At 65 years old, I finally found out who I am when I'm not looking after ungrateful men. A week later, when the initial panic subsided, I received an official envelope. It was a subpoena to testify at Robert's trial, scheduled for 2 weeks away. Sharon, who had stayed in Austin with me, reviewed the document. "Are you ready for this? Facing him in court won't be easy." I looked out the window at the park that had become my refuge. "I'm ready." The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Austin. I was back in the part of the city where Robert lived for the first time since my escape, feeling a strange disconnect from the streets I used to frequent. Sharon was driving while I watched the urban landscape pass by the window. "Nervous?" she asked when we parked. "Strangely, no. I feel like I'm closing a chapter." In the courtroom, I sat next to Sharon in the front row. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze, came to greet us before the session began. "Ms. Smith, your testimony will be crucial today. Robert is trying to portray himself as a victim of circumstances, manipulated by more powerful allies." "He was always good at presenting himself as a victim," I commented. The side door opened, and Robert entered, escorted by 2 guards. He was thinner, his face marked by deep, dark circles. Our eyes met for an instant, his pleading, mine firm. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The trial began with procedural formalities, followed by testimony from forensic experts who detailed the complexity of Robert's financial schemes. When my name was finally called, I walked toward the witness stand with slow but determined steps. After the oath, the prosecutor began. "Ms. Smith, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, your son?" I looked directly at Robert as I spoke. "I raised him alone after my husband's death, 5 years ago. Before that, we lived like an apparently normal family." I paused. "Only apparently. How so?" "My husband, Richard, Robert's father, was also manipulative and financially controlling. Robert learned from the best." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you detail how your son manipulated you financially?" I told them everything. The successive loans, the broken promises, the emotional pressure, the veiled blackmail. In the final episode, he demanded $280,000, practically all my savings, to supposedly pay off his wife's debt. When I realized I would never see that money again, just like I didn't see the previous amounts, I decided to leave. "What made you make that decision after so many years of giving in to his demands?" I thought for a moment, searching for the right words. When he said, "Don't let me down, Mum," I realized he didn't see me as a person, only as a resource to be exploited. At that moment, something inside me broke, and it fixed itself in a different way. Robert's lawyer stood up for the cross-examination. He was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit with a calculating expression. "Ms. Smith, do you consider yourself a good mother?" The question caught me off guard. I saw the prosecutor begin to object, but I raised my hand slightly. For decades, I believed that being a good mother meant giving my son everything: money, time, my self-esteem. Now I understand that being a good mother also means teaching responsibility and consequences. "You abandoned your son when he needed you most," the lawyer insisted. "No, sir. I stopped enabling destructive behavior. There is a big difference. And what about the threats your son supposedly made against you? Don't you find it convenient that these allegations are only surfacing now, when he is about to propose a deal with the prosecutor? I remained calm, despite the insinuation. The recordings speak for themselves. And no, I don't find it convenient that my own son offered my address to criminals as collateral for his debts. I find it tragic. When I was finally dismissed, I returned to my seat, feeling my legs tremble. Sharon squeezed my hand in silence. The trial continued with other testimonies. Robert's employees, harmed clients, even Laura, who described years of lies and manipulation. Throughout that time, I watched Robert become increasingly agitated, whispering furiously with his lawyer. At the end of the day, when the judge announced a recess until the following morning, Robert looked at me one last time before being led away. There was no longer any pleading in his eyes, only a cold hatred that made me shudder. Back at the hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. Robert's expression haunted me. It was the same expression Richard used to have when he didn't get what he wanted. A mixture of rage and calculation, as if he were planning his next move. In the morning, we returned to the courthouse to hear the closing arguments. The prosecutor presented a solid case, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. Robert's lawyer tried to portray him as a struggling businessman who made mistakes, but not intentional crimes. When the judge retired to deliberate, Sharon and I went to a nearby coffee shop for coffee. I was distractedly stirring my coffee when I noticed a man sitting a few tables away, watching us. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. "Sharon," I whispered, "that man is watching us." She looked discreetly. He must be a reporter. The case received some local media attention, but something about the man's posture, the way he avoided eye contact while clearly monitoring us, alarmed me. "Let's go back to the courthouse," I suggested. As we left, I noticed that the man also stood up. On the way back, he kept his distance but continued to follow us. At the courthouse, I mentioned the incident to one of the officers, who promised to be vigilant. The session resumed with the judge returning to announce his decision. In the case of the state versus Robert Richard Smith, this court finds you guilty of all charges. A wave of relief washed over me, immediately followed by a deep sadness. My son, the child I once carried in my arms, was now officially a convicted criminal. The judge continued detailing the sentence. 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4 years, in addition to fines and restitution to the victims. Robert remained impassive during the sentencing. When the guards approached to take him away, he turned in my direction. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "You're going to regret this." As I left the courthouse, I noticed the same man watching from a distance again. This time I pointed him out directly to the officer accompanying us. The man noticed and quickly disappeared into the crowd. "We need to go back to the apartment today," I told Sharon as we walked toward the car. "I don't feel safe here." In the week following the trial, I tried to resume my routine in Austin. Police protection had been reduced to periodic patrols, as Robert's threats seemed less viable now that he was convicted and under constant surveillance. One afternoon, upon returning from the farmer's market where I sold my craft pieces, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked near my building. Something about the vehicle put me on high alert. Maybe it was the heavily tinted windows, or the fact that it was strategically positioned to have a view of the building entrance. Instead of going in, I walked past and called Detective Olivia. "It might be nothing," she admitted, "but it doesn't hurt to check. Stay in a public place while we send someone." I entered a nearby coffee shop and waited, watching through the window. 20 minutes later, a patrol car approached the suspicious vehicle. 2 men quickly got out and tried to flee, but were intercepted by the police. My phone rang. It was the detective. Ms. Smith, we detained two individuals with criminal records. They had unregistered weapons and your address written on a piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine. Robert's associates? Probably. We're interrogating them now. Do you have a safe place to stay for a few days? I called Sharon immediately. Her response was quick and decisive. I'll pick you up in an hour. We're going to my beach house in Galveston. No one knows about it. I returned to my apartment, escorted by the police, to pack some essential belongings. As I hastily packed a suitcase, I looked around at the home I had built with such affection. Once again, I needed to run. Or maybe not. A thought began to form in my mind. An idea that would have seemed absurd to the old Mary, but that now made perfect sense. When Sharon arrived, I explained my plan. It's risky, she warned. Living in fear is riskier, I replied, and I'm tired of hiding. The next day, instead of hiding in Galveston, I returned to my apartment, this time with a clear goal. With the help of Detective Olivia and her team, we set a trap. The two detainees were persuaded to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They revealed that Robert, using another inmate's cell phone during visiting hours, had hired a third person to give me a scare, a euphemism for something much more sinister. He doesn't care if you get seriously hurt, the detective explained. He just wants you to know he still has power, even inside prison. The plan was simple. I would maintain my normal routine, pretending not to know anything, while undercover police monitored my every move. When Robert's man showed up, he would be arrested in the act. For 3 days, I lived in a state of constant alert. Any noise made me jump. Any stranger on the street seemed like a threat. On the morning of the 4th day, while watering the plants on the balcony, I noticed a man leaning against a pole across the street, watching me intently. Our eyes met briefly before I went back into the apartment and signaled the undercover officer disguised as a cleaning lady who was tidying my living room. "It's him," I whispered. "I'm sure." The man continued watching the building for about half an hour. Then slowly, he started to cross the street toward the entrance. The doorman, another disguised officer, let him in without question. I sat on the living room sofa, facing the door, and waited. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The police were hidden in the room with the door ajar. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to open it. "Ms. Mary Smith?" the man asked, an ordinary-looking individual who could easily go unnoticed in a crowd. "Yes. I have a message from your son." Before he could make any move, 3 officers emerged from different points in the hallway and quickly subdued him. The man didn't resist, seeming almost relieved to have been caught. Later that day, Detective Olivia visited me to inform me that the man had confessed everything. Robert had promised to pay $5,000 to scare the ungrateful mother who had abandoned him. "And what exactly did scares mean?" I asked. The detective hesitated. "It involved breaking some objects in your apartment, making verbal threats, and—" She stopped. "Leaving visible marks on you. Nothing fatal, but enough to make you never feel safe again." I sat down, feeling my legs buckle. "Is this enough for new charges against Robert?" "Yes. Attempted assault, contracting third parties to commit a crime, threats. This will likely eliminate any chance of parole for the next few years." A week later, I visited Robert in prison. He seemed surprised to see me, as if he hadn't expected me to have the courage to face him again. "I came to say goodbye, Robert," I said when we sat face to face, separated by glass. "Say goodbye?" "Yes. The person you tried to scare confessed everything. You're going to face new charges, and you'll probably be staying here much longer than you imagined." I paused. But I didn't come here for that. I came to tell you that I'm moving on with my life. Robert laughed bitterly. What life? You're 65 years old, Mum. You're alone. I'm free, I corrected him. And I discovered that it's never too late to start over. You know, I always defined myself as Richard's wife or Robert's mother. Now I'm discovering who Mary is. He looked at me with a mixture of contempt and confusion. And who is Mary? I smiled sincerely. A woman who finally learned to value herself. A woman who is no longer afraid. Robert slammed his hands on the glass, frustrated. You think this is over? It's not over. I'm going to get out one day. When that day comes, if it ever does, I'll be ready. I stood up. Goodbye, Robert. Leaving the prison, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. The sky was a particularly bright blue that day. The air seemed sweeter. Sharon was waiting for me in the car. How did it go? Liberating, I replied. Truly liberating. A year had passed since my escape and Robert's arrest. Autumn had arrived in Austin, painting the park trees in shades of red and gold. My small craft business had grown. I now had 3 students, older women like me, who came every week to learn and mainly to talk. Laura and my grandchildren visited me twice. Peter and Julia filled my apartment with their laughter and energy, building castles with wooden blocks and painting watercolors with me, which now decorated my refrigerator. Laura was working as a teacher in her new city, slowly regaining her confidence and independence. Robert had been sentenced to 3 years more in prison due to the attempted intimidation. News about him occasionally reached me through Detective Olivia, with whom I had become friends. As far as we knew, he was quiet, perhaps finally accepting his situation. One Saturday afternoon, upon returning from the farmer's market, I found a woman waiting for me at the entrance of my building. She must have been in her 50s, grey-haired, and with a face that looked vaguely familiar. Mary Smith? She asked when I approached. Yes. My name is Caroline Smith. She hesitated. I was Richard's wife before you. I was speechless. Richard had vaguely mentioned a previous marriage, saying his ex-wife was emotionally unstable and obsessed with money. Ironies I could now understand. Would you like to come in? I finally offered. Sitting in my small living room with 2 mugs of tea between us, Caroline explained the reason for her visit. I saw the news about Robert in the paper, about how he manipulated you financially for years. She took a deep breath. Richard Zhao did the same to me. And when I read about you, I realized I needed to find you, to close a chapter, perhaps. How did you find me? It wasn't difficult. Your story spread among support groups for women who suffered financial abuse. You became a kind of symbol of resistance. I couldn't hide my surprise. Me, a symbol? Caroline smiled. A 65-year-old woman who left everything and started over, facing her own son in court. Yes, Mary, you inspired many of us. We talked for hours. Caroline told me how Richard isolated her from her family, controlled every penny, and made her feel incompetent in managing money. How, when she finally divorced, he left her with practically nothing, only to then marry me and repeat the pattern. It was a story that seemed to echo my own life. When he died, she continued, I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage. Relief because he could no longer manipulate anyone. Rage because there was never justice. He never had to face what he did. I understand perfectly, I said. For a long time, I only blamed Robert for his actions. But now I see that Richard planted those seeds. Our son simply followed the example he saw at home. The cycle continues, Caroline murmured, unless someone breaks it. At the end of the afternoon, I exchanged contact information with Caroline and promised to keep in touch. After she left, I stayed on the balcony watching the sunset and reflecting on our conversation. Richard and Robert, father and son, both now out of my life, one by death, the other by prison, both leaving scars that I was still learning to heal. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I had recently acquired. Today, at 66 years old, I realized that I spent most of my life trying to be what others wanted me to be. A dedicated wife, an altruistic mother, a personal bank, always available, always yielding, always afraid of displeasing. Now, finally, I am learning to be just Mary, and discovering that Mary is stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever imagined. The money Robert extorted from me over the years, I can't get back. The years I spent in a suffocating marriage with Richard, I can't get back. But the time I have left is all mine, to live as I choose, without fear, without manipulation, without regrets. The next day, I received an email from Caroline. She had spoken with other women who went through similar situations and suggested forming a support group. I immediately accepted. Our first meeting was at a coffee shop near the park. There were 5 of us, all with stories of financial and emotional control by husbands, sons, or brothers. We shared our experiences, our sadness, our small and great victories. At the end of the meeting, Sharon, who accompanied me, suggested, "You should formalize this, create a non-profit organization or something. There are so many women out there who need to hear these stories, who need to know that it's never too late to start over." The idea quickly took shape. In a few months, New Beginnings was officially registered as a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting women victims of financial and emotional abuse. Using my crafting skills, I created our symbol, a colourful phoenix rising from the ashes. Our first public conference attracted more than 40 women. I was nervous as I stepped onto the small makeshift stage, but as I began to speak, my voice grew stronger. My name is Mary Smith. I am 66 years old. For almost 7 decades, I allowed others to control my life and my money. First my husband, then my son. Until one day when my son demanded $280,000, almost everything I had, something inside me broke and fixed itself. I looked at the attentive faces in the audience. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to start over. And it is never, ever too late to discover who you truly are when you are not living for someone else's approval. The applause was deafening. 2 years after my escape, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Robert, written in a handwriting that seemed more contained, less impulsive than I remembered. "Mary," the letter began, without using the word Mum. "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But to tell you that I'm in therapy here in prison. The psychologist made me see patterns I couldn't see before. How I repeated exactly what my father did with you. How I learned to see people as resources, not as human beings. I'm not making excuses. I'm just acknowledging the truth. And the truth is, you were right to let me face the consequences of my actions. I know you will probably throw this letter away, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that, despite everything, I'm proud of the person you've become. I saw your photo in the newspaper speaking at that conference. You looked different, stronger." I read the letter several times, feeling contradictory emotions. Caution, because I knew Robert's capacity for manipulation well. Sadness for what might have been. And surprisingly, a touch of hope. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session. Another healthy habit I acquired in my new life. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked after I read the letter. "I don't know. A part of me wants to believe he's really changing. Another part reminds me how many times I was tricked before. What if both parts are right? What if he's genuinely trying to change, but it's still not safe for you to reconnect? Those words stayed with me in the following days. Finally, I wrote a brief response. Robert, I received your letter. I can't say I trust your words. Trust, once broken, is difficult to regain. But I acknowledge your effort to seek help and reflect on your actions. My life is now focused on helping women who went through what I did. I found purpose and peace in that work. I sincerely hope you find your path too. If it's a true path of change, perhaps we can talk again someday. Not as the mother and son we were, but as two people trying to be better. Mary. I sent the letter without great expectations. I didn't expect a response and didn't receive one for months. That was fine. My life had taken its own course, regardless of Robert or the shadows of the past. Spring arrived in Austin, transforming the city with vibrant colors. Our organization, New Beginnings, had grown, now with a small office downtown and dedicated volunteers. Twice a week, we offered free financial education workshops, something I myself had to learn from scratch at 65. Laura became a frequent collaborator, sharing her own journey of financial and emotional recovery. My Saturday afternoons were reserved for my grandchildren, who now came to visit me regularly. Peter, almost 9, loved to draw with me. Julia, at 7, was already interested in my crafts. "Grandma," she asked me one afternoon, as we worked on a piece together, "are you happy now?" The question caught me by surprise. I stopped embroidering and looked at my granddaughter, her eyes curious, her face innocent. "Yes, sweetie," I replied with sincerity, "happier than ever." "Even without Grandpa and Daddy?" I chose the words carefully. "Sometimes, Julia, we need to step away from the people we love to find ourselves. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It just means we need to love ourselves too." She seemed to consider my words, her eyebrows furrowed in concentration. "Like when I need to be alone in my room sometimes, even though I like playing with Peter." I smiled, admiring her childish wisdom. "Exactly." In July of that year, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Olivia. "Ms. Smith, I'm calling to inform you that your son will be transferred to a halfway house next month." The news took me by surprise. I thought, with the additional charges. He showed good behavior, completed rehabilitation programs, and his lawyers managed to get a sentence review. He will still have severe restrictions, but he'll be able to work during the day. I thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling an unease I hadn't felt in a long time. Robert would be partially free. What would that mean for me, for Laura, for the children? I called Sharon immediately. "Do you think I should be worried?" I asked, after telling her the news. Sharon, ever practical, responded, "We'll increase the security of your apartment just in case. But honestly, Mary, I doubt he'll try anything. He would have too much to lose." A week later, I received another letter from Robert. Unlike the previous one, this was formal, almost distant. "Mary, I'll be transferred to a halfway house next month. I wanted you to know from me and not from someone else. I'll be working on an urban reforestation project during the day and returning to the unit at night and on weekends. I have no intention of seeking you out or interfering in your life in any way. I learned my lessons the hard way. The psychologist here says respecting boundaries is the first step toward healthy relationships. I'm trying to practice it. I also wanted you to know that I've been talking to Laura about the children. She agreed to let me write them letters under her supervision. Maybe someday I can see them again when she feels safe." The absence of the word "mum" at the beginning and end of the letter did not go unnoticed. He was truly trying to establish a new dynamic, respecting the fact that our old relationship was irrevocably broken. I shared the letter with Laura on our next video call. She confirmed that she was indeed allowing Robert to write to the children. The therapists believe it's important not to completely demonize their father, she explained, and his letters have been different. He asks about their interests. He doesn't try to manipulate. He doesn't make empty promises. Do you think he's really changed? I asked. Laura shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe he learned to be more subtle. That's why everything is supervised. She paused. Are you going to respond to this letter? I thought for a moment. I think so, to make it clear that I'm aware of the situation and that my boundaries remain intact. My response was brief. Robert, thank you for informing me about your transfer. I wish you all the best in this new phase. I'm glad to know you're in supervised contact with your children. They deserve a father who can be healthy and positive in their lives. As I said before, I found my path. I sincerely hope you find yours too. Mary, July arrived with intense heat. On a particularly hot Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. Miss Smith, this is Roberta from the Correctional Transition Center. We have a problem with your son, Robert Smith. My heart pounded. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but there was an incident at the worksite today. He argued with another inmate and, well, he refused to fight back when he was provoked. In fact, he walked away and found a supervisor. The problem is, this makes him a target for other inmates, and we're worried about his safety. What does that have to do with me? I asked, confused. Robert requested a transfer to another project, preferably one where he could work alone or with direct supervision. We have an opening in an urban restoration program to revitalize a public park near your neighborhood, but we need your approval, given the history between you. I was silent for a moment, processing the situation. Robert had chosen not to retaliate, even when provoked, something the Robert I knew would never do, and now he needed my help. Did he specifically ask to work near me? When we mentioned the location, he hesitated and asked if there were other options, but this is the only project that meets his safety needs right now. This surprised me. Robert was genuinely making an effort to respect my space. How far would the worksite be from my apartment? I asked. About 15 blocks. He wouldn't be allowed to leave the project area, which will be monitored. I took a deep breath. Okay, I give my approval. After hanging up, I questioned my decision. Was I being naive again, or was I finally exercising compassion without compromising my boundaries? I called Sharon and explained the situation. You did the right thing, she assured me. Keeping Robert safe while he tries to rehabilitate doesn't mean letting down your guard. It just means you're human and you have compassion. In the following week, Robert started his new job at the park. I purposely changed my route to the market to pass by there, keeping my distance. I saw him from afar, planting tree saplings under the scorching sun. He was thinner, his posture less arrogant. For a moment, he seemed to sense my presence and looked in my direction, but I didn't approach. In August, I received another letter. Mary, I know you saw me at the park a few weeks ago. Thank you for not approaching me and for approving my transfer to this project. The work has been therapeutic. There is something deeply gratifying about transforming an abandoned space into something beautiful and useful for the community. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted to express gratitude for this small act of kindness that I don't deserve. The letter was different from the others, more focused, less manipulative. I decided to respond with a symbolic gesture. The next day, I left a small box at the community center that supervised the project. Inside were good quality gardening tools and a book on urban gardening. No note, no expectations. Weeks passed without a response, and that was fine. I had learned that healthy relationships don't demand immediate or calculated reciprocity. In September, our organization New Beginnings held a large event, a weekend workshop on financial independence for women. I would be the keynote speaker, sharing my journey from total dependence to financial autonomy. On the morning of the event, the auditorium was full with almost 80 women. I stepped onto the stage feeling that familiar mix of nervousness and determination. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Mary Smith. At 67 years old, I'm learning who I am when I'm not defined by the men in my life." The audience laughed softly, and many nodded their heads. 3 years ago, my son showed up at my door, demanding $280,000, almost everything I had. Like so many times before, he was counting on my inability to say no. And as many of you know, these patterns don't come out of nowhere. They are cultivated over decades. In my case, it all started with my husband controlling every penny, every decision, making me believe I was incapable of managing my own life. As I spoke, I noticed a movement at the back of the room. A tall, thin figure had entered discreetly and was standing near the door. My heart pounded as I recognized Robert. For a moment, I lost my train of thought. The audience noticed my hesitation, and some turned to see what had distracted me. I took a deep breath and continued. The most difficult and most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no, when I walked out the door, with only one suitcase and the determination but not to be an extension of someone else's bank account anymore. I spoke for 30 minutes more, aware of Robert's silent presence at the back of the room. He didn't try to approach, he just listened. When I finished, I received a standing ovation. Women came up to me to share their stories, ask for advice, thank me. Robert remained where he was, patiently waiting for the crowd to disperse. Finally, when the hall was almost empty, he slowly approached. He seemed unsure, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "Hello," he said simply. "Hello," I replied. "Your speech was both powerful and painful to hear." He paused. "Thank you for the gardening tools." We stood in an awkward silence. Two people who were once so close, now practically strangers. "How did you know about the event?" I finally asked. "Laura mentioned it in a letter. I asked for special permission to come, just to listen." I nodded, realizing how he was respecting boundaries, asking for permission instead of assuming rights. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm different," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Learning to live with the consequences of my choices. Learning to exist without manipulating or controlling." He looked directly at me. "Learning that people are not means to an end." We talked for almost an hour. There were no grand revelations or dramatic reconciliations, just two adults sharing experiences honestly, perhaps for the first time. When we said goodbye, Robert asked, "Can we do this again someday?" "Maybe," I replied, one step at a time. The next morning, as I walked through the park with Sharon, I reflected on the encounter. "Do you think he's really changed?" my friend asked. "I think he's making an effort," I replied honestly, "and that's more than Richard ever did." "And you? Are you ready to forgive?" I watched the flowers blooming in the park, their eternal cycle of renewal. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once," I finally said. "It's a daily practice. I'm learning to forgive him and myself for allowing this for so long." That afternoon, sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, I wrote in my journal. "Today, at 67 years old, I'm learning that life rarely offers perfect endings. There's no guarantee that Robert has truly changed or that he will continue on this path. There's no certainty that I won't fall back into old patterns in moments of weakness. But perhaps life isn't about perfect endings. Perhaps it's about starting over as many times as necessary, about breaking toxic cycles even when it seems impossible, about believing that we can be more than our worst moments or our most painful mistakes. The money Robert demanded that morning, 3 years ago, was the price of my liberation. A high price, but infinitely less than the cost of remaining trapped in a life that wasn't truly mine. Today, I'm not financially rich. I live modestly. I earn enough selling my crafts and with my small savings. But I am immensely rich in other ways. In genuine friendships, in purpose, in inner peace, in a courage I didn't know I possessed. And if there is one lesson I would like to leave for my granddaughters, for all the women I meet at New Beginnings, it is this. Never is it too late to say no. Never is it too late to rediscover who you are when you're not living to please others. Never is it too late to start over. At 67 years old, I'm not ending my story. I'm just beginning to write the most authentic chapters. I closed the journal and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the organization. Another opportunity to transform my pain into purpose, my experience into guidance for other women. The doorbell rang. It was Sharon with a bottle of wine. "To celebrate," she said, walking in. "What are we celebrating?" 3 years since you said no. 3 years of freedom. We smiled and toasted under the sunset sky. "To courage," I proposed. "To Mary," Sharon corrected, finally living her own life. Now, if you liked this story, click to subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left your mouth open. Oh, and don't forget to become a member for access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll see you there.